Our final speaker is Nader Avzalan. Nader is a visiting professor of geodesign at the University of Redlands in California. He serves as the past chair of the APA Technology Division and the co-chair of the APA Smart Cities and Sustainability Task Force. Nader's professional and academic interest focuses on the role of civic technologies and smart city strategies in creating more resilient and equitable communities. Nader's work has been presented at academic and professional conferences in the US, Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. So Nader, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. So we heard from Mary and Angela about working with marginalized communities and ways in which we can engage them. So I'm going to look at online engagement and focusing on issues of digital divide. So in the past 10 years or so, a lot of planning organizations have started using different types of online engagement tools and methods to engage larger number of audience and more diverse types of communities. And also in the past 10 years or so, we heard a lot about issues of digital divide and the fact that by using online engagement methods and processes, we're missing some communities, especially marginalized communities or those who do not have access to internet. So based on Pew Research in 2015, which is about even 3 years ago, 92% of US teenagers go online daily. And also about 40% of US adults engage in civic and political activities through online networking sites. And again, we are talking about 3 years before. So right now, these numbers are even higher than this. So with all of these enhancements in the use of technology and availability of technology to a larger and more diverse audience, does digital divide still exist? And the answer is yes. Please do not leave the webinar. I'm going to talk about some other interesting things as well. So the question is digital divide related to race? Is digital divide related to income? So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about relationship between the rate of online engagement and the participants' background. So for example, do we see more online engagement in white neighborhoods? Do we see more online engagement in more affluent communities? And I'm going to also talk about the strategies for equitable online engagement. When you are using online engagement tools and methods and processes, how you can make those processes more equitable. I'm going to talk about a particular research that I did, which was focused on Chicago bike share planning. And CDOT a couple of years ago did use a civic engagement technology, which is a kind of online mapping tool to ask people a very simple question: where do you want to have a bike share station? So they use a kind of online mapping technology to engage people in the city of Chicago to answer this question about bike share stations. So people were able to locate a point on a map and say, I like this location. They needed to provide their name, their email address, their location of residence, especially their zip code, and also they were able to explain why they like this location. The engagement process is done, that's over, the plan is implemented, and the good news is that you can use bike share system in Chicago right now. It's been used by a large number of people. It's actually pretty active and popular. You can go and look at Divi's website. If you just search for Divi Chicago, you can get to the website and you can get all the information you need about what kind of people are using and also about the rates that people are using these kinds of new transportation modes. It's interesting to see that the locations that suggested by people online correlate with the locations that are actually the location of the stations that are actually implemented. So online suggestions pretty much correlated with the implemented station. So basically, we can kind of say that CDOT used people's online comments in implementing these bike share stations all around Chicago. But the thing is that who participated online? Do we know about this? So I looked at a particular stage of the online engagement process, and based on that, about 1,400 people participated. 45% were male, 33% were female, and we do not know much about the rest of them. People were interested in using bike share system for shopping purposes. About 25% talked about that. People were interested in using bike share stations for work or school. About 1/3 of participants talked about that. And it's also interesting to see that people interested in using bike share systems just for fun. About 40% of people talked about this. The participants were from various socioeconomic background. So the question is that, is the online engagement associated with their socioeconomic background? Again, so I'm referring back to my earlier question. Does race or ethnicity matter here? What about diversity index? What about education? What about income? What about unemployment rate? So for example, do we see more participation from neighborhoods that are well educated comparing to the other neighborhoods? Does income matter? Do we see more participation in more affluent communities or not? So I answered these kinds of questions based on a particular case that I just talked about, which is about city of Chicago. I did the whole analysis, all the statistical analysis, and as a result, it shows that some of these factors are important. So for example, online engagement is positively associated with wide population, population density, and education. More online participation, we can see that in white neighborhoods. We can also see more online participation in well-educated neighborhoods comparing to the other neighborhoods. But some other factors are not important. So for example, well, some other factors are negatively associated with participation. So for example, in Black neighborhoods, and in this case, we're talking about zip codes. In Black zip codes in the city of Chicago, we see lower online participation. Also, there is negative correlation between unemployment and online participation. And it's also interesting to see that income and Hispanic population does not matter. Again, we are looking at the city of Chicago here for this study. So based on this study, median household income was not associated with the online participation. At least in the case of Chicago, and I can imagine in the case of a lot of other cities, income may not matter as much as before when we are talking about online participation. So based on this study and several other case studies I've done before, I'm going to talk about 4 considerations for equitable online engagement. The first one is that we need to consider digital literacy still. Mary talked about LEP, Angela talked about language barriers as well. These issues are very important. So maybe we can think about even issues like age or level of education instead of income. I mean, income still matters. We're talking about the US context in urban areas. Income still matters, but maybe that's not as important as age or level of education or some other variables that I just talked about. I think many of us have experienced something like this when we are working with our younger colleagues, or for example, in my case, I'm working with my students, and I'm totally, I'm super excited to see how comfortable my young students are with using new technologies and online media. So that's fascinating. We have experienced probably something like this when we are hanging out with our kids as well. It's very easy for them to use these kinds of mediums and technologies. I'm not advocating for online technology per se here. I'm just saying that some of the factors we've been considering before, like income, may not matter as much as before. Second, we need to explore the socioeconomic profile of the participants. We should not allow anonymous participation. Some of our colleagues are using technologies that allow people to participate without providing any background information. And using these technologies is fascinating for them because they can get a lot of responses from a lot of people. But the problem is that if we do not know who is participating, I'm not sure if we can think about an equitable participation. I'm not sure if we can rely on that data. We need to know about the people who have used our online media. Third, we need to analyze our engagement process. Do you need other engagement methods? If you ask me this question maybe like 2 years ago, I would say that, oh yes, if you're using online technology, you definitely need to focus on using face-to-face public participatory methods and those kinds of things as well. At this moment, I think it depends on the context. Maybe if your audience is about American youth who can speak English and you can use an easy to use technology, maybe that can be your main media. We can still use other types of methods, including face-to-face meetings and public sessions or other types of methods we've been using before. But this kind of engagement method, which is about online engagement, may be the main method that we will be using. Again, it depends on the context as well. Fourth, we need to go where people are. Instead of asking them to join our online tools or our online forums, maybe we can just go where they are. There are online neighborhood forums such as Nextdoor that are about online groups that are created for neighbors to discuss different social activities. So we as planners can join those kinds of communities and start engaging them for a variety of purposes. As the main takeaway, again, I think it's very important to evaluate our context and think about our participation strategy, thinking about language barrier issues, thinking about age, thinking about other socioeconomic factors, and then think about our participation strategy. Our cities are getting data obese, I think. We are, with all the focus on smart technologies and with the old conversation we are having about smart cities, we're using all of these sensors and all of these different methods to gather data from citizens. It's good to have data. It's great to have access to this huge databases, but the thing is that we need to know who represents these data in order to think about an equitable planning process. Before I wrap up my talk, I have an interesting announcement. In the technology division, we are having a smart cities contest. As part of this smart city contest, we are asking for proposals. The deadline for proposals is about 10 days from now. It's January the 29th. We are interested in hearing from you whether you are working in a very large organization or in a small nonprofit. We are going to evaluate proposals based on your capabilities. We're looking for projects that are about the use of different types of technologies in planning and design. And those projects should be applied and at least you should be done by the first or second stage of your project. So you should have done something to show us. But the deadline is about 10 days from now. If you are interested, just search for Technology Division Smart Cities Awards. You can send me an email if you have a question about this or if you have any comments, or you can also send your questions to Michelle and Tom. Their information is online as well. With that said, thank you very much.